Well, that doesn't work. Better. Okay, so we're choosing this lovely floor setting. Hello. We're choosing this lovely floor setting, and we're taking me as I am because I am freshly, more or less, out of the shower. I just have been eating crisps, so there might be disgusting stuff stuck between my teeth, but I don't care, I need to film this video. More importantly, I actually should film the previous version of this video for the months of July and August, I guess, because I haven't even edited that one and I'm already doing the September-October one. But here we go, let's talk about the books that I read in September and October. I feel like these are 2 months in which I was kind of slumping. Not really, I was just way too busy at work to have the energy to like fully go out and like read like extensive amount of time outside of work. So most of this is like audiobooks that I was devouring on my commutes, and then some reading that happened outside of that, but definitely not to the same extent as I normally would have. In the evenings, a lot of time I was just like, you know, binging Gilmore Girls and stuff like that. I was also sick for a time in October, and whereas I always like to imagine that when I'm sick I'm gonna do a lot of reading, when I was sick I actually did 0 reading. So without further ado, let's just dive into it. I also have some of these that I won't spend too much time on because I have a vlog that I still need to edit in which I talk about some of them. But so, in September, the first thing that I finished is an audiobook, which is the audiobook. And of course, now that I'm here, my cat is interested in her feeding bowl again. Though she's also looking at my foot like, oh, why is your foot half in my feeding bowl? Because I can imagine that it's distracting her from feeding. So exactly, hey, I guess that is like the downside to this view for you guys, is that my cat is right here at my feet, but you guys don't get to see her. But so the first thing that I finished in the month of September is Free the Darkness by Cal Kate. This is the first book in the King's Dark Tidings series. I'm gonna mention a second book within this video, so we'll only do the synopsis once, alright? So Reskin is a guy who, as a young boy, he was moved into this fortress where he was trained to become a sort of like super warrior. He was trained in all sorts of fighting styles, but also in like the etiquette at court, at the layout of important structures, in how to make poisons and all those things, antidotes for poisons. So he has been trained with a particular purpose all of his life. However, he's never really been told that purpose neither. And when we start off this story, we are at the onset of his sort of like graduation, and he has to kill off all of his sort of like teachers, and then his primary masters are supposed to remain standing. However, his teachers think differently about the whole experience, and so a big fight ensues, and basically all of his masters end up being dead, and so nobody actually knows what Reskin's purpose is in life. And so Reskin kind of is setting off into the world with just 2 final cryptic messages from his masters. One, to kill with conscience. However, he has never been trained in any sort of emotional intelligence. He has no idea what the concept of conscience even is. And secondly, to protect and honor his friends. However, as he's never been trained in emotional bonds, he doesn't really understand how friendship or love works. And so sets out into the world, but luckily he finds some people who quite quickly call him his friends. And as a consequence, he has to protect and honor them. So I like this series a lot. It's very much more sort of like light-hearted, comedic fantasy, because, you know, we have this character who is good at whatever he sets his mind to. However, he's never been trained in emotional relationships, in dealing with emotions. And so he has this extensive knowledge on all subject matters, except for those things that seem kind of essential to what it means to be a person in this world, which creates a lot of miscommunication, but miscommunication which is there for a real reason, not for sort of like doubts about the intentions of other people, or the extent of people's feelings, just miscommunication because he takes everything literally and doesn't take social cues at all. I really like the series. First and second book are actually my favorite, so I really enjoyed this reread of Free the Darkness. And I'm rereading the first 4 of these in order to be able to read the prequel and the 5th book in 2024. Next up, I did quite a few books for the Booker Prize. These are the ones that I'm gonna try and go over relatively quickly because most of my thoughts on them will be in a separate vlog, which I really should edit because the announcement for the winner will be somewhere this month, right? So I should potentially try and get this one out before that. First one that I finished is In Ascension by Martin McInnes. This is a sci-fi novel in which a huge discovery is made, which kind of changes a lot of man's idea about its role in the universe, and our protagonist is involved with some of the research that goes on with that, starting with deep sea research, and we move on from there. And that's kind of what I liked less about this book. I love the deep sea research part because the deep sea is a very creepy, mysterious place that we don't really know too much about. We also don't really have much set in that particular setting, and so I really enjoyed that a whole lot. Whereas the second setting, or like the later half of this book, has a different sort of focus, which also it can be very unsettling, but I feel like I've consumed more media in that setting, so I basically lost a lot of my sort of like initial feelings for this book, because initially there was just this sort of vibe and atmosphere that really worked well, and I lost that aspect, and then it just didn't interest me all that much anymore. Next up, I finished The House of Doors by Tan Tuan Ung. So this is a historical novel taking place across 2 timelines. We're looking at a wife and husband who are entertaining guests in Malaysia. So they are British, I believe, originally. They are expats living in Malaysia in, I don't even know what time, somewhere in 1921. And they are taking in the guest, which is a author called William Somerset Maugham, I believe. And the book takes place mainly in that timeline, but in that timeline we will have our female, like the woman of the household, basically revisiting events that took place previously that involve the Chinese historical figure of Sun Yat-sen. I really enjoyed this one. I'm doing nothing to sell this book because I just don't know how to otherwise describe it, but I really loved this book. I thought it was beautifully written. I loved the way in which it was told. I was hooked the entire way through. This is also a queer book because we have the character of W. Somerset Maugham, who is a gay guy. He's there with his assistant, and I really love this. I really highly recommend this. If you are a literary fiction, historical fiction reader, then read The House of Doors. Next up we have This Other Eden by Paul Harding. I was hoping for more with this one. This is a book about a isolated community living on an island off of the coast of the US, I believe, or maybe Canada, who basically have been isolated there for generations, and therefore the way that their civilization has developed is much more simplified compared to the way in which mainland civilization has evolved within that time period. And so when the outside is trying to get in, that has consequences for the way in which this society is able to maintain itself. Didn't really work for me. There was one section that worked, but the majority I was just really not that interested in. Next up we have Western Lane by Chetna Maru. This is a short book about a girl who is playing squash, but it's mainly a book about grief, family, coming of age, first love, and all those types of things. I definitely enjoyed it, but it was not really spectacular to me. There were certain passages that definitely were strong, certain of the sections about the relationship between this girl and her father, who has had to take care of them since their mother passed away. Certain of those passages were definitely very moving, but on the whole I kind of felt like this left me wanting more. Then, moving away from the Booker for a little bit, next up I finished The Lost Metal by Brandon Sanderson, fourth book in Mistborn Era 2. Mistborn Era 2 on the whole just isn't for me, okay? So in this one we are looking at the world that we left behind in Mistborn Era 2, and 200 years or so have passed by. So the events and the characters from Mistborn Era 1 have basically passed on into legend. However, I wouldn't necessarily say that you can read it without having read Mistborn Era 1, just because there are some overlaps, there are some characters from Mistborn Era 1 that pop up in Mistborn Era 2, and basically for me that was like more or less the highlight, except in some cases I actually didn't like it when some of these characters showed up neither. But this is a industrial era world, so we are looking at the dawn of like trains, gunpowder, and all of those types of inventions. And because the magic system in the Mistborn universe is metal-based, we will see how this metal-based system has been impacted by all of this metal being used in heavy industry, which is probably one of the more interesting aspects of this series, is kind of looking at the development of the magic system. But so we're looking at a detective duo within the series, and if you've been around on this channel for a while, you know that I don't like detective. I don't care who done it or whatever. So from the onset that meant that a lot of the times I'm just not gonna like this one, because that's just not the type of story that I like to consume. This fourth one had a focus shift towards one of the characters that definitely is already important in the first one, but has definitely taken a much more prominent role within this fourth one. I feel like the third and the fourth one I enjoyed more than the first and the second, but still this is just sort of like very middle of the road for me. I did not have an emotional impact at any point throughout this, which is not to say that there isn't the potential for emotional impact depending on your level of involvement with these characters, but I just had no level of involvement with the characters, resulting in me not having any sort of an impact from this book. And for a concluding novel in an epic fantasy series, that should have been the case. And so yeah, I finally read it, but it did nothing for me. And I might actually, but I probably won't. I was gonna say I might get rid of Mistborn Era 2, but I guess I'll wait until Mistborn Era 3 and 4 are out, so until I'm in my 70s or 80s or whatever. Because, you know, if I really like 3 and 4, then I probably won't get rid of Mistborn Era 2, because it will just be weird not to have Mistborn Era 2 on my shelves, right? I'm a little bit concerned about Mistborn Era 3 just because it's computer age, so it's our current day, and I feel like the more modern it's become, the less I enjoy of it. But I really think it has to do with the gunpowder, so I'm hoping that for Mistborn Era 3, when he's moving into the computer age, that the focus will really be on like knowledge is power, and this idea of like misinformation or like spinning information to your advantage, or like gathering information in order to be able to get people to do what you want. That will be more of the focus. It will be more on sort of like computer data and all of that, rather than continuing to focus on like gunfire, because yeah, he is an American, so guns do still play a big role in the US compared to here, where, you know, almost nobody will have guns around here. So there is still that potential, and I'm assuming there will be some guns, of course, but I'm hoping that most of the focus steers away from this sort of like combat style storytelling, because I just feel like that isn't the reality we live day to day, right? It isn't all about combat. It's more about like, you know, money transfers and stuff like that, capitalism and all of that, which will probably work for me if that is the direction he's going to take it in. But that was a whole side tangent that nobody was asking for. Then we have He Who Drowned the World, second book in the Radiant Emperor duology by Shelley Parker Chan, first book being She Who Became the Sun. I did love She Who Became the Sun more than I loved He Who Drowned the World, which is not to say that I didn't enjoy this book. I just like the things that like really got me excited about She Who Drowned the World, I was now expecting for She Who Became the Sun. I was now expecting for He Who Drowned the World. So in that regard, they weren't like, I wasn't as excited about them anymore because I was expecting them to be there, if you understand what I mean with that. And then a character that I don't particularly enjoy all that much is much more prominent, I feel, in the sequel than, or maybe I've just blocked him out of my memory of book one. And so while I did appreciate that perspective towards the end, and I did think that that was an interesting perspective, a lot of the times I was just like, oh, do we have to read from this perspective again? So I definitely still enjoyed it, but She Who Became the Sun is definitely much more my favorite than this one was, and there is definitely a part in here in which like emotions were just like going up, down, up, down, up, down, which I did not appreciate in the moment. So I feel like, yes, I was definitely emotionally involved in that aspect of the novel. And then the final book that I finished, which just was supposed to also be on that pile, right? Maybe I already put it away somewhere, but that is A Study for Obedience by Sarah Bernstein. This is a novel about basically outsiders moving into a close-knit society. So basically this is a sister moving in with her brother, and her brother is part of this sort of like small town where, you know, everybody knows everybody, but this town certainly seems to have an identity or a way of life that they think she does not fit into. And so very early on also certain coincidences mean that they start to be very wary about her and start to think that, you know, her presence is a menace or that it is unwelcome in the town. And so it's a lot about us versus them type of mentality. But also the further you kind of get into the story, the more you're also starting to feel like, oh, do they actually have a point? Because there definitely were times in which I was like, yeah, you're really not helping your own witchy image by doing these types of things. But overall I feel like I was really not that engaged with the story. It was really just sort of like middle of the road experience again. Moving on to October, which I read the exact same amount of books. So I read 8 more books. So first of all, I read the sequel to Free the Darkness. So I read Reign of Madness by Kel Kate. Once again, really great book. These are my 2 favorites in the series. To be fair, they're the 2 that I just remember the best. Maybe because I loved them that much, or maybe just because I probably reread them at some point when I was going into book 3 or 4, and so I just have a better memory of them. So I'm very eager to see how my experience with book 3 is going to go, because so far, but I'm really not that far in, it's mainly like, oh wow, I've forgotten all of this. Then we go to The Bone Shard Emperor, second book in the Drowning Empire by Andrea Stewart. Same sort of deal as with He Who Drowned the World. I liked the Bone Shard daughter a little bit more than I liked the Bone Shard Emperor, just because of the type of story, I guess. In the Bone Shard Emperor, we're starting off with 3 perspectives. The main 2 are a smuggler who's kind of on the run from a society that he is in debt with, who picks up a sort of animal companion with mysterious sort of powers. And then our second perspective is the daughter of the Bone Shard Emperor, who basically is in this competition with his adoptive son to try and prove their dominion of the Bone Shard magic, and they're basically kind of rewarded throughout by being granted more keys that unlock doors within the palace. And so, you know, it's kind of competition, and she's not playing by the rules. I really enjoyed that a whole lot, and in this one we kind of move past that sort of perspective. But what I do like is that we have 2 perspectives, like we have 3 or 4 perspectives in total that we follow, but 2 perspectives are sort of like people with secrets to hide from one another, while they also very much rely on one another, and I do like that dynamic a whole lot. What I also like is that one of the perspectives that I didn't enjoy all that much in book 1, I did enjoy a lot more within this book, and I definitely thought that their storyline was a lot more interesting than it was in past book. Overall, I still definitely enjoyed this one a whole lot. I'm still very eager to see where this story as a whole is going to develop from here, but I was just a little less intrigued within this one as I was within the first one. A lot more bone shot magic being done in book 1 as well compared to book 2, which also, like, I felt it to be kind of a loss, but the bone shot magic has always been interesting because it's a super morally grey magic to use, because it's basically taking life force away from the person whose bone you're using. So obviously using bone shot magic isn't really without repercussions, and so as a consequence it's a good thing to use less of it. But I did find the bone shot magic very interesting in book 1, so I did kind of miss it. Next up, I listened to The Library of the Dead by T.L. Hutchu. So this is a sci-fi novel set in a futuristic, very bleak version of Edinburgh. Basically, Edinburgh is kind of gone to shits, or the world probably has gone to the shits. Our protagonist is a young girl who lives in a trailer park with her grandmother and her younger sister. She has the power to communicate with spirits, and she uses that to basically deliver messages from the ghosts to their beloveds, and then get paid by their beloveds for delivering that message. But one day she encounters a ghost who has a missing son, and she ends up looking for her son, and then we kind of have a whole sort of like case of what is happening in this town with kids disappearing and all of that. It is detective based. I should have looked into the synopsis, I guess, beforehand. I didn't really do that. The title, The Library of the Dead, made me think of something completely different, and The Library of the Dead does take, like, we do visit it within this book, but I assumed it to be like a huge part of the plot, and it really isn't. Next, let's move on to some books I actually physically own. I read Before We Say Goodbye by Toshikazu Kawaguchi, and these need to stop, guys. I need this series to stop. I will continue buying these because, first of all, they look beautiful, but they, like, it's been wrung out. I feel like it should have stopped after book 2. A lot of people, I think, feel like it should have just been a standalone, but I do feel like book 2 added something to the mix. I feel like book 4 could have added something to the mix if it would have, for example, exchanged the ghost in the cafe or something like that, if one of these stories would have ended badly, but it didn't. So in Before the Coffee Gets Cold, the series, we are basically visiting this cafe in Tokyo where you can travel back in time. However, you cannot change your present by going back to the past. It's very much a sort of like closure deal. You get closure about something that happened in your past by revisiting the past, but it's not like it changes anything about present day circumstances. There are a whole lot of rules, including that you have to finish your coffee before it gets cold, because otherwise you are stuck in the past and become the ghost that is sitting on the chair. But yeah, it's run its course. No more, guys. Like, yes, you can come up with 20,000 other scenarios, I guess, in which people would want to travel back in the past, even though it doesn't change their present circumstances, but you don't have to, you know? Unless we're doing something original with a formula next time around, there really is no need to come up with any more of these books, because book 3 and 4, I feel, was just like following a successful formula, but a formula in terms of creative work just doesn't work after a while, because it becomes too predictable, too much of the same. I do feel like the repetition of rules is a little bit less in this one than it has been in previous installments, because I assume that they know that by now everybody who's reading these books knows about all these rules, though they still repeat them at the very beginning, but it felt a little bit less like it was repeating it every single time, luckily. Next up, I'll Study for Obedience was here. Next, I finished Upstream, an essay collection by Mary Oliver. My thanks go out to Hans, who gifted this to me for my Christmas last year. Unfortunately, this one didn't work for me. It was on my wish list, so it's my fault that it didn't. But like, it's an essay collection, but I don't really feel like it is essays the way that I've been consuming essays in the past. Like, it felt, Mary Oliver is also a poet, and that definitely was noticeable. It's very much more sort of like poetic ramblings at times. There are some that definitely feel more like an essay, but a lot of those were also like about certain classical poets that I just wasn't interested in. So I definitely skipped those ones, because I read the first one, which I think was about Edgar Allan Poe, and I was like, I got nothing out of this, and I really don't feel the need to do the same for like William Wordsworth or whoever the other poets were that were being discussed like that. So I did go through these, but sometimes when I just wasn't feeling a certain essay after 1 or 2 pages, I did skip it and move on to the next one. So unfortunately it wasn't for me, but hey, I tried, and that's all you can do. You can try and see whether it's for you, and if it's not, then just let go, I guess. Another continuation. I've been doing well with continuations actually in the past 2 months. I read The Battle Drum by Sada El-Arifi, which is the second book in the Ending Fire trilogy. So in this one we're looking at a society which is heavily segregated by the color of your blood. There are red bloods, blue bloods, and transparent bloods. And the reds are on top, the blue ones are kind of like the merchants, so to speak. So the red ones have all of the power. They decide the rules of how society works, what people are allowed to do. And then the transparent ones, they are being punished for a rebellion that took place in the past. They basically have their limbs cut off when they are still children and their tongues removed, so that they cannot really communicate with other layers of society, but they do have a language, a sign language that they developed amongst themselves. Now, 10 years before the start of this book, there was a plot developed from the blue bloods to steal some red-blooded children in order to replace them with blue bloods, to try and thus infiltrate the higher layers of society and change the rules from within. However, this plot was uncovered, and most of these children were killed. We are following one of the surviving children, and she deals with the trauma, the guilt, from that experience. She's in a very bad place at the beginning of this book, and the other character that we're following is basically one of the displaced children, so one of the blue bloods that has been growing up in a red-blooded household, who has to deal with the resentment from her mother every single day of her life. Now we'll see these two characters meet one another and try to help one another in basically a competition to become part of the political power in this world. And a sapphic romance ensues. I really enjoyed this series. I do feel like I also enjoyed the first book a little bit more than I enjoyed the second book. But that's also because here in the second book we have characters in different places of the world from one another. I typically enjoy when you start off in different places and you move towards one another, but here we have the first book with all of them in the same place and the second book with a split, and so I enjoyed that just a little bit less, but I definitely still enjoyed it. What I really also enjoyed is we are being introduced to a new character, and I really thought that that was an interesting perspective, and there's a revelation with that perspective towards the end that was like, what? So I am definitely still looking forward to the third book within this series, and there's just so much about this world opening up within this book that definitely also really was interesting and fun to read about. Next, the final 2 days of the month, I still finished 2 more things. We are going to speed through it because I don't have any light anymore, it seems like. So we have A House with Good Bones by T. Kingfisher. This is a haunted house book. Basically, this is a girl going back to her parental home and finding things very much changed over there and her mother behaving in a weird way. Haunted house setting, which I've really enjoyed a whole lot. I enjoyed the mystery and the eeriness of that situation. However, as soon as sort of like the mystery is revealed, I lost interest with it. And then the final thing that I read is Saga Volume 10. So this is a comic book series by Fiona Staples and Brian K. Vaughan. There was a bit of a sabbatical between Volume 9 and 10, but so Volume 10 came out last year. I got it for Christmas and I've just been reading it now. I don't have anything to say about individual volumes of these, except for maybe Volume 9, which stood out. If you've read it, you know why. I feel like all of these volumes individual, I'm just like, meh, but the series as a whole, I do enjoy a whole lot. This is basically a sci-fi Romeo and Juliet. We have 2 characters who are part of 2 different cultures that inhabit a single planet, and they are at war with one another. However, these 2 characters meet, they fall in love, they get pregnant and the world or the galaxy or the universe is out to get them because they don't want this precedent to be set of, you know, the idea that it is possible to have these characters love one another, be at peace with one another, understand one another. So I enjoyed the series as a whole, but as I said, each individual volume doesn't necessarily strike me with a ton of interest, but yeah, I enjoyed a lot. So these are the books that I read in the months of September and October. It's actually still quite a bit when I go through it like that. I felt like I wasn't reading a lot, but through my commute I definitely still got through quite a fair bit because... So I thought I'd shoot an end video here because my camera, like the memory card was full, so I was just about to do the outro. So yeah, I am happy with my reading, even though it was a little bit of a less focused time, and then I was like I was feeling less intentional in my reading, I guess. But I still got to quite a fair bit apparently, so I'm still happy with my reading, and I am definitely back on a little bit more of an intentional reading spree at this point in time, so I hope to get through quite a fair bit of books in November and December. But so yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video, and see you guys for the next one. Bye!